Craig Price, USA, age 15. In the late 1980s, the small city of Warwick, Rhode Island, was shaken by a series of killings that would become one of the most disturbing juvenile crime cases in American history. At just 15 years old, Craig Price committed acts of violence so brutal that police officers described the scenes as some of the worst they had ever encountered. Price's crimes began when he was only 13, stabbing a neighbor to death in her home. 2 years later, in 1989, he shocked the nation by slaughtering an entire family. His victims were Joan Heaton and her 2 young daughters, ages 8 and 10. They were stabbed dozens of times in a frenzy so violent that knives broke under the force of the attacks. What horrified the community even further was Price's total lack of remorse. After his arrest, he casually mimicked the sounds of the murders, even joking about them in custody. Yet, because of his age, Rhode Island law classified him as a juvenile. That meant the maximum he could serve for 4 murders was just a few years in a youth facility. Then he would walk free at 21. The public outcry was immediate. Many demanded changes to state law, arguing that someone who had committed such atrocities should never be allowed back into society. Price himself seemed to embody that fear, making threats that he would kill again once released. His case became the driving force behind reforms in juvenile sentencing laws across the United States, closing the loophole that had once shielded teenage offenders from harsher punishment. In the end, Craig Price never walked free at 21. Instead, he remained behind bars due to new charges and violent behavior while incarcerated. But his story remains a chilling reminder of how the legal system can be blindsided by crimes committed at an age when most expect children to be innocent. He is remembered as the Warwick Slasher, and his case still sparks debate over how justice should balance youth with accountability. Alyssa Bustamante, USA, age 15. In October of 2009, the small town of St. Martin's, Missouri, was rocked by a crime that seemed almost impossible to comprehend. At just 15 years old, Alyssa Bustamante committed an act of violence so cold and methodical that it shocked not only the local community, but the entire country. Her victim was 9-year-old Elizabeth Alton, a cheerful neighbor who simply wanted to visit a friend after school. When Elizabeth didn't return home, her family raised the alarm, and an all-night search began. Police and volunteers combed the area, hoping to find the little girl safe. Instead, their investigation led them directly to Alyssa. Alyssa admitted that she had lured Elizabeth into the woods near her home, strangled her, slit her throat, and buried her in a shallow grave. What truly horrified investigators, however, was Alyssa's own explanation for the crime. She said she had killed her neighbor just to see what it felt like. Even more disturbing was her private journal. In it, Alyssa described the murder in chilling detail, ending her entry with the words, "It was amazing." The case became an international headline not only because of her age, but because of the apparent lack of remorse that Alyssa displayed. Prosecutors argued that she was a deeply troubled teenager with violent fantasies, while her defense tried to emphasize her history of depression and self-harm. Ultimately, the jury was unmoved. Alyssa avoided a potential sentence of life without parole by pleading guilty to second-degree murder in 2012 and received a term of life with the possibility of parole after 35 years. To this day, Alyssa Bustamante's crime stands as one of the most unsettling examples of adolescent violence in modern American history, a reminder that the darkest impulses can sometimes emerge behind a face that looks far too young to be capable of such terror. Graham Young, UK, age 14. In the early 1960s, suburban London became home to one of the most disturbing cases of adolescent crime in British history. At just 14 years old, Graham Young earned the chilling nickname the Teacup Poisoner after developing an obsession with chemistry, not for school experiments, but for lethal ones. Graham was fascinated with toxic substances from an early age, collecting books on poisons and teaching himself how they worked. Unlike most teenagers, who might tinker with simple concoctions, he used his growing knowledge to secretly test deadly chemicals on his own family. Almost daily, he offered tea or meals laced with antimony and thallium, carefully observing and recording the violent illnesses they caused. His stepmother eventually died from the poisoning, while other relatives and classmates suffered severe stomach pains, hair loss, and nerve damage without knowing why. What horrified investigators even more was Graham's cold detachment. He treated the suffering around him as if it were a scientific project. In his notebooks, he detailed the effects of each dose, measuring symptoms with the precision of a laboratory researcher. He was only caught after teachers and doctors noticed a disturbing pattern of illnesses and traced them back to him. Arrested in 1962, he was sent to a psychiatric institution. But Graham's story didn't end there. After years of treatment, he was released in his early 20s, only to poison again, this time killing co-workers at a factory in the 1970s before being arrested once more. He would eventually die in prison in 1990. Graham Young's case remains a haunting reminder not just of how dangerous early obsessions can become, but of how a boy with a bright, intelligent exterior was really nurturing one of Britain's darkest criminal minds. Even today, the name Teacup Poisoner stands out as a symbol of innocence twisted into cold, methodical evil. Daniel Bartlam, UK, age 14. In April 2011, the quiet town of Nottingham, England, witnessed a crime that felt more like a horror script than real life. At just 14 years old, Daniel Bartlam murdered his own mother in a brutal attack that blurred the line between television fiction and reality. Daniel was fascinated by violent TV shows and horror films. Friends and teachers described his growing obsession with dark storylines, particularly characters who killed without remorse. That fascination turned deadly one night when he picked up a hammer and bludgeoned his mother, Jacqueline, to death in their home. To cover his tracks, he set the house on fire, hoping that the flames would destroy evidence and make it appear as if she had died in the blaze. But investigators quickly uncovered the truth. Forensic analysis showed that Jacqueline had suffered multiple hammer blows before the fire was started. Even more chilling was what detectives found hidden in Daniel's room: his personal writings, which read like scripts for his own twisted drama. In one story, a teenage character killed their mother in almost the exact same way. When questioned, Daniel tried to shift the blame, claiming he had been inspired by a soap opera villain and that he killed in a moment of madness. The jury, however, saw something far darker. His meticulous planning and his almost theatrical attempt to disguise the crime revealed that this was no sudden loss of control. In 2012, Daniel Bartlam was convicted of murder, becoming one of the youngest killers in modern British history to be sentenced for premeditated matricide. His case remains infamous not only for its brutality, but because it asked a chilling question: how much can popular culture influence a fragile, violent mind? Or was Daniel already determined to act out his darkest fantasies, with television simply giving him a script to follow? Erik Smith, USA, age 13. In August of 1993, the small town of Savona, New York, was shaken by a crime that seemed almost impossible to believe. The killer was not a hardened adult, nor an unpredictable stranger, but a 13-year-old boy named Erik Smith. One summer day, Erik encountered 4-year-old Derek Roby walking alone to a local park. Instead of playing or walking with him, Erik lured the young boy into a wooded area nearby. Once out of view, he attacked Derek with terrifying cruelty, strangling him, striking him with rocks, and leaving his small body among the trees. The crime stunned the community not only for its brutality, but because it was committed by someone who himself still looked like a child. When police questioned Erik, his innocent appearance, thick glasses, bright red hair, and a boyish demeanor made it difficult for many to reconcile him with such horror. But his confession removed all doubt. He admitted to the killing, later explaining that violent urges had built up inside him and that he had just wanted to hurt someone. The case drew national headlines and sparked intense debate about whether someone so young could truly understand the meaning of their actions. Prosecutors pushed for him to be tried as an adult, and Erik was found guilty of second-degree murder. He was sentenced to the maximum possible penalty for his age, 9 years to life in prison. Over the decades, he appeared before the parole board multiple times, each time reigniting painful memories for Derek's family. In 2022, after nearly 30 years behind bars, Erik Smith was finally released. For some, his case remains a disturbing symbol of how violence can emerge in the unlikeliest figures. For others, it is a story that raises one haunting question: can a child who kills ever truly be rehabilitated? Jesse Pomemeoy, USA, age 12. In the early 1870s, the city of Boston was horrified by the crimes of a boy who would become known as the boy torturer. His name was Jesse Pomemeoy, and at just 12 years old, he earned the grim title of the youngest convicted murderer in American history. Jesse's disturbing behavior began even earlier. Neighborhood children feared him for luring them into remote areas, where he would tie them up, whip them, cut them with knives, and even burn them. These sadistic attacks eventually brought him to the attention of the authorities, but his young age led many to believe he could be reformed. Instead, his violence only escalated. In 1874, Jesse was linked to the brutal killings of 2 children, 10-year-old Katie Curran and 4-year-old Horace Millen. Katie disappeared from her neighborhood after reportedly heading into Jesse's family shop, while Horace was found stabbed and slashed near a beach in South Boston. The ferocity of the wounds suggested rage well beyond what anyone expected from a child. When police searched the Pomeroy home, they found Katie Curran's body hidden in the basement. Combined with Jesse's history of tormenting other children, this left little doubt about his guilt. He was convicted of murder at just 14 years old, making him the youngest person in Massachusetts to face such a sentence. Although he was originally condemned to death, his age spared him from the gallows. Instead, Jesse Pomeroy spent more than 40 years in solitary confinement, becoming a kind of living ghost within the prison walls until his death in 1932. To this day, his story stands out not only for its brutality but for the unsettling question it raised more than a century ago. How could someone so young harbor such cruelty? For Boston, Jesse Pomeroy remains a chilling reminder that monstrosity can sometimes wear the face of a child. Robert Thompson and John Venibals, UK, age 10. In February 1993, Britain was left in shock by a crime so brutal, and by perpetrators so young, that it sparked outrage and debate that still continues decades later. 10-year-olds Robert Thompson and John Venibals became the country's youngest convicted murderers when they abducted and killed 2-year-old James Bulger. The crime began in a Liverpool shopping centre, where the pair targeted James as he wandered away from his mother's side. Surveillance footage later revealed a haunting image, the two boys calmly leading James by the hand out of the building. What followed was a long walk across the city, during which they inflicted injuries on the toddler before finally killing him near a railway line. His body was later discovered on the tracks, his injuries described as horrifying even by hardened investigators. The revelation that the killers were just 10 years old sent the media into a frenzy. Court proceedings drew massive attention as reporters, parents, and politicians all grappled with the same unthinkable question: how could children commit such an act? The trial revealed disturbing details. Venibals and Thompson appeared to have planned their attack in advance, discussing abduction and using the day's events as an opportunity to carry it out. Both boys were convicted of murder and detained for years in secure juvenile facilities. In 2001, upon turning 18, they were released under new identities to protect them from public retaliation. But the controversy has never ended. Subsequent legal troubles for John Venibals reignited debate and public anger, with many demanding tougher treatment, while others pointed to the importance of rehabilitation. The murder of James Bulger remains one of the defining criminal cases in British history. It forced the nation to confront an uncomfortable truth. Sometimes evil emerges not in shadowy figures or hardened adults, but in children who, at least on the surface, seem far too young to understand the weight of their actions. For Britain, the haunting image of James Bulger's final walk remains burned into collective memory. Amarjit Sada, India, age 8. In 2007, a small village in Bihar, India, became the site of one of the most disturbing revelations in modern crime history. At just 8 years old, Amarjit Sada confessed to committing murders that would earn him the haunting title of the world's youngest known serial killer. The victims were not strangers, but infants. First, his own baby sister, then a cousin, and finally a neighbor's 6-month-old daughter. Each of the killings took place in quiet surroundings where no one suspected that a child could be behind such horror. Amarjit would lure the babies away, take them into secluded fields, and strangle them. What truly stunned investigators and villagers alike was Amarjit's demeanor after his arrest. Reports described him as calm, smiling, and even proud as he recounted what he had done, showing no sign of fear, guilt, or confusion. For officers accustomed to suspects breaking down under questioning, the sight of an 8-year-old coolly confessing to multiple murders was beyond comprehension. Because of his age, Amarjit could not be tried in a traditional court. Instead, he was placed in a juvenile home, where the maximum detention allowed under Indian law was 3 years. The community, and later the world, was left reeling at the thought of what might happen once he grew older. Would he reoffend? Could rehabilitation succeed in a case so extreme? Amarjit's crimes remain a rare and deeply unsettling reminder that the face of violence is not always that of an adult predator. Sometimes it can appear in the unlikeliest form, a child still in primary school, whose actions defy explanation. Even today, the case of Amarjit Sada raises one haunting question: what makes an 8-year-old capable of killing again and again? Pedro Lopez, Colombia, early teens. Pedro Lopez is remembered by history under a far more chilling title, the Monster of the Andes. He would eventually confess to killing hundreds of girls across Colombia, Ecuador, and Peru, making him one of the most prolific murderers the world has ever known. What is less certain, but deeply unsettling, is that Lopez may have begun killing long before he became infamous as an adult. Born in Colombia in 1948, Lopez grew up amid extreme poverty and abuse. His childhood was marked by violence, abandonment, and cruelty. According to some reports, by his early teens, he had already begun abducting and killing young girls, shaped by the trauma and rage of his own suffering. While investigators debate the accuracy of these early claims, what is known is that by the 1970s and 80s, Lopez had refined his crimes into a horrifying cycle. He lured children with small gifts, gained their trust, and then attacked. Arrested in Ecuador in 1980, Lopez stunned authorities by calmly confessing to the murders of more than 300 girls across South America. Investigators were horrified when they realized that many of his confessions matched unsolved disappearances across multiple countries. Experts and journalists alike described him not only as a killer, but as a predator who could move silently from place to place, exploiting societies too overwhelmed to stop him. Yet despite confessions numbering in the hundreds, Lopez's fate was stranger still. After serving just 14 years in prison in Ecuador, he was released and then later rearrested in Colombia. His ultimate whereabouts in recent years remain murky, fueling both speculation and fear that he may once again have slipped into the shadows. While Lopez's reputation rests mostly on the staggering body count of his adult crimes, the possibility that his murderous urges began in his early teens only deepens the horror. If true, the monster of the Andes is not just one of the deadliest killers in history. It is also a reminder of how early trauma, shaped in childhood, can grow into something unimaginably monstrous. Buddhist boy killers of Vietnam, ages 10 to 15. In the 1970s, amid the shadows of war-torn Vietnam, a chilling case emerged that has since faded into obscurity but remains one of the most disturbing examples of juvenile violence in Asia. A small group of boys, all between the ages of 10 and 15, became known as the so-called Buddhist boy killers after they were linked to the murders of several younger children. Details about the case are scarce, but what is known paints a deeply unsettling picture. The boys allegedly lured smaller children away from crowded streets and schoolyards into secluded areas. Once isolated, the group attacked together, carrying out killings that investigators later described as cruel and deliberate. One of the most horrifying aspects was not just that the crimes were committed by children, but that the violence appeared to be collective. It was not the hidden darkness of a single individual, but the dangerous escalation of mob mentality among a group of adolescents. Local villagers were horrified as rumors spread. Some struggled to believe that children raised among families and community temples could commit such acts, while others feared that the chaos and trauma of the time, an era marked by war and instability, had twisted those boys beyond recognition. When the group was finally caught, reports suggested they showed little remorse, instead treating the violence almost like a shared game that had spiraled fatally out of control. Because records from the period were inconsistent and often censored, the true number of their victims may never be known. What is certain is that their crimes left a chilling lesson. Cruelty can be contagious, and when it emerges among the young, it can spread in ways that society is least prepared to handle. Today, the case survives not as a detailed entry in law books, but as a grim reminder of how mob mentality and violence can take root even in childhood, and how communities already scarred by conflict can be blindsided by predators in their midst who are, themselves, still children. Mary Bell, UK, age 11. In 1968, the city of Newcastle, England, was shaken by a case that seemed almost impossible to comprehend. At just 11 years old, Mary Bell became infamous after strangling two young boys, Martin Brown, aged 4, and Brian Howe, just 3 years old. What shocked the nation even more than her age was her behavior in the days that followed. Mary's crimes began in May, when little Martin was found lifeless in an abandoned house. At first, his death was dismissed as a tragic accident, but weeks later, another boy, Brian Howe, was discovered in a nearby wasteland, his body showing disturbing signs of strangulation and mutilation. This time, investigators knew it was no accident. As suspicion grew, Mary's actions unsettled everyone around her. At Martin Brown's funeral, she was seen smiling, seemingly satisfied as mourners wept. Along with a friend, she left chilling handwritten notes at the crime scene, mocking the police and effectively confessing in a child's scrawl. To those around her, she appeared disturbingly fascinated with the attention the killings brought, frequently asking if people missed the boys or if they believed the killer would ever be caught. When questioned, Mary at first denied involvement, but her demeanor gave her away. Witnesses recalled her calmly describing elements of the crimes only the killer would know. In December 1968, she was convicted of manslaughter on the grounds of diminished responsibility. Sentenced to indefinite detention, she served 12 years before being released at age 23 with a new identity, a decision that sparked controversy and anger from the families of the victims. Today, Mary Bell remains one of history's most infamous child killers, not only because of what she did, but because of who she was, an 11-year-old girl whose eerie smile at a funeral and cryptic notes turned tragedy into one of Britain's most haunting cases. The Silent Twins, June and Jennifer Gibbons, UK, teens. In the 1970s and 80s, Britain became fascinated by the strange and disturbing case of June and Jennifer Gibbons, identical twins whose bizarre bond made them both infamous and mysterious. Nicknamed the Silent Twins, their story was unlike any other. Two teenagers who spoke fluently only to each other, shut out the rest of the world, and allowed their shared inner life to spiral into crime and violence. From an early age, the sisters were inseparable but also unnervingly isolated. They developed a secret language that no one else could understand, communicating almost exclusively with each other. Teachers and doctors tried to intervene, but the twins' refusal to engage with outsiders only deepened the mystery. As they grew older, the withdrawn world turned darker. They filled diaries with disturbing thoughts, violent fantasies, and obsessions with death. In their teens, this inner turmoil erupted into real crime. The twins were arrested for theft, vandalism, and eventually arson after setting fire to buildings. Their actions shocked their Welsh community, which had viewed them only as quiet, shy girls. Instead, authorities suddenly saw a dangerous blend of psychological instability and destructive behavior hiding beneath their silence. Declared a threat to themselves and others, June and Jennifer were committed to Broadmead, a high-security psychiatric hospital, where they remained for over a decade. Even there, their strange relationship haunted doctors. Sometimes they refused to eat unless together. At other times, they acted as if one sister's death was necessary for the other's survival. In 1993, shortly before their release, Jennifer suddenly died from unexplained heart inflammation at just 29, leaving June to live alone for the first time in her life. To this day, the story of June and Jennifer Gibbons remains one of Britain's most unsettling youth crime cases. They were not serial killers in the traditional sense, but their spiral into violence and psychological darkness showed how thin the line can be between troubled childhoods and dangerous outcomes. The silent twins remain a haunting reminder that sometimes the greatest mysteries lie not only in what people do, but in how they choose to live in silence, cut off from the world around them.